Hello, everybody. Welcome to Loop and Learn's T1D speaker series. Really interesting and different kind of talk today. We'll be visited by Seagrove Partners, Erik Verhoef. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He is president and CEO, and it's a market research firm. And one of their specialties is the type 1 diabetes or the diabetes market and technology. And I heard one of his partners talking at Diabetes Mind Innovation Summit, and it was just really interesting. We know what we think as type 1s. It's nice to see what the market is doing, and he also has some really interesting information today about what the healthcare providers think. You know, we can complain, but it'd be nice to know exactly what they think, what they're doing, and maybe how we might get some ways of interacting a little bit better. So I expect this to be interesting. Please, if you have questions, put them in the chat. We're also live on Facebook and up on YouTube, and questions anywhere, and we'll get going. As a reminder, Loop is a do-it-yourself closed loop algorithm. It is not FDA approved for therapy, and you take full responsibility for building and running your system, and you do so at your own risk. We're not going to be talking about settings and how to do Loop today, but just wanted to remind you. Once again, bookmark loopandlearn.org, an amazing website that is constantly being updated with the latest and the newest. You've all been hearing about Dash, and information just keeps flowing. Also, be sure to sign up for the newsletter. Carol puts that out every week. It is full of essential information. So please get on the mailing list, and that way you won't miss a critical update or a critical information about not updating. It's important, so it doesn't take much, just join. Upcoming, I have nothing hard scheduled right now, but we're looking at doing some little looper programs to listen to the voices of the kids. We hear about us all the time, and we've had a couple events where there are little kids on. First of all, they're really cute, but they have this amazing wisdom and kindness about them and how they're managing their lives. And they also seem to love it when we listen to them. So I think it would be a great opportunity. We're going to try to figure out how to run this in a kind of cute and fun and enabling or empowering way. If you have suggestions or companies you're interested in hearing from or technologies you want, please let us know. And we're going to be doing a few open mic nights coming up, and those ought to be fun as well. Today, Seagrove Partners is going to talk all about attitudes and behaviors in diabetes management between persons with diabetes, PWDs, and healthcare professionals. Seagrove Partners is a consulting firm dedicated to uncovering customer insights from perspectives of both the end user and the commercial entities. And we're pretty much the end user, so we're part of this. Their diabetes-focused corporate clients include device manufacturers, software developers, healthcare professionals, and big pharma. There's the big one. This presentation details recent market research with T1D PWDs, that's not easy to say, and prescribers and educators, and how reactions to diabetes technology can vary significantly, highlighting the need for both groups to better understand the other side. If you have not dealt with this issue with your healthcare provider and her understanding of what you do, consider yourself lucky. We're leaders, we're innovators, and we're not always listened to. So in other words, I'm the PWD, what do I think? And you're the HCP, what do you think? And how does that help me? Erik Verhoef, interesting man. I just met him like a few minutes ago, but I've been following his company. He is CEO and president of Seagrove Partners, which he founded in 2016 after spending 9 years, pay attention, 9 years with Tandem Diabetes Care, where he headed up strategy, business development, marketing, and market research, leading to the design and commercial launch of T-Slim. Okay, pay attention. He knows this stuff. He played a pivotal role in helping the company raise 5 rounds of venture funding and was part of the core team that completed Tandem's initial public offering, one of the most successful issuances in the medical device history. Prior to Tandem, Erik held roles in commercial analytics and marketing. He has an MBA in finance and a certificate in health services management from Duke University. He also has a BA in European history from Northwestern, so we could talk history here as well. And he is currently completing coursework, this is interesting, in molecular biology at MIT. So he is a Renaissance man, possibly. He knows a lot. He deals with a lot of the people we interface with. A lot of what he's doing is covered by NDAs, so he can't always talk a lot, but we can ask a lot. And we'll see what he has to say, what kind of hints he drops, what we can learn from him. I think this is going to be an unusual and a fun event for us. And please welcome Erik Verhoef. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Joanne. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, you should be able to see my screen now.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I've been in healthcare for 30 years, covering everything from hospital stuff to pharma to biotech devices, and I was one of the founders of Tandem Diabetes Care. And so that was the first time that I kind of got exposed to the type 1 area. And we started by doing a lot of market research initially in 2007. So this is over 15 years ago, and trying to understand kind of what the unmet needs were in the type 1 space. And at that point, the Omnipod had just launched. Medtronic was still kind of the dominant pump manufacturer. And throughout that market research, we found that things like, user interface, the Apple iPhone had just launched. People liked, touch screens, things like that, was really important. And people wanted that these medical devices to be more of a consumer play. And that's really how the t:slim was kind of developed. And so throughout the years, we every year, every quarter, basically, we do a lot of market research with people in the type 1 and type 2 space. And what I've always found interesting was the disconnect really between people that are living with diabetes and then those that are their caregivers and the prescribers, the diabetes educators. And a lot of times it's not as stark as as I'm going to show in our slides. If you're living in a major urban area like San Diego, which is where I'm from, you've got fairly decent access to good endocrinologists and educators, but that's not the case for the majority of America, and a lot of people don't have access to this level of care that we have in big urban areas. And there's a lot of differences and disconnects between what the people that are living with diabetes want and what their prescribers know about, what they're recommending. And in one of the recent earnings presentations from Dexcom, their CEO Kevin Sayer was like, their major impediment right now for growth is just the level of knowledge and the understanding from the prescriber community about continuous glucose monitors. And you would think that after the last 10 years, everybody would know about CGM, but that's not the case. And so what I'm going to show you is just some data, and I encourage everybody to ask me questions about the data and everything else, because I'm probably best when I'm just responding to questions and not presenting stuff. So with that, I'm going to go with the data here, and we have 3 sections. One's just on general diabetes issues, the second one is on CGM, and the third is on pumps. And I know a lot of you are loopers and interested in the AID system, so I really want to talk about that at the end. Yep. So when we ask about different pain points from the prescriber community, and these are we have prescribers and educators here. Interestingly, the biggest one that they feel, for their type 1 community is infusion tubing getting caught on things, or, having things attached to them. People being out of range also scores highly. But I thought it was interesting that tubing is number one. And when you look at, the market share of Tandem and of Medtronic versus Insulet, tubing is not really a big issue. You still have 70% plus people that are using tubing as their main way of delivering insulin if you're on a pump. But the HCPs feel like that is a big issue. Now, when you ask the PWDs, what their big issues are, especially this group who are not on pumps right now, their biggest complication is, or their biggest worry is about complications while they're asleep. So this is the going too low, going to while you're in bed, or you're waking up with a high blood sugar, and then your whole day is kind of ruined, as you're trying to kind of chase blood sugars throughout the day. And then number two is trying to do that, during the day and worrying about that. But number one is being what happens when you're asleep. And then the pumpers who have kind of solved this issue with being on an automated system. And there's tons of data which show that, lows during the night pretty much go away when you're on an automated system. Their biggest thing is dealing with insurance companies and then the customer service folks when they have an issue on their pump. And so this is more kind of like, tactical stuff with their device, and not so much about the clinical aspects of being on a pump. But I just thought this was very interesting, the dynamic between these two. Whereas the HCPs, I think they feel like once they prescribe a product, that this stuff goes away. The insurance companies having to deal with people on the phone, once they get you on a product, they don't really kind of deal with that. But that's really what people are concerned about once they're on a pump, is how do you make that more streamlined and easy to deal with, versus people who are on MDI. They're concerned more about this issue while they're asleep. And then we asked about influencers, and most of the HCPs talk about professional conferences. So this is the ADA conference. There's the one for the diabetes educators. There's ACE, which is the clinic, the endocrinologist conference. And then there's ATTD, which is more of the technology conference internationally, which covers a lot of the closed loop stuff. And so when they, think about during the year where they're getting their information from, it's from these conferences. And then secondly, it's from these peer-to-peer discussions that happen at the water cooler at their office. And so they're looking at, some other endo or an educator that's there that heard about something, and they're talking about it in the office. Things like TV commercials, pop-up ads, all this kind of like, social media stuff really is scores lowly here. And I think part of it is they just don't feel like it's legitimate enough. And it's not clinically validated like they feel like these things are. But when you look at what the PWDs say, diabetes focused websites, doesn't matter if you're type 1, type 2, or a pumper, that's number one. That's where
the pudding.
Give him 100 grams.
100 grams.
That's what I gave insulin for.
Okay.
Now, what type of pudding?
It's lemon.
Oh,
Wait, whoever's got their
Because
mic
you guys
on,
all
please.
had different choices. Dad was going.
And we're gonna
Probably
eventually all
Julie.
eat the stuff that we have in the
Julie.
pantry. So this time is one thing.
Julie, please, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So people are looking at diabetes focused websites as their source of information, as well as what they see in the doctor's office, but also social media pops up very strongly from whether it's Facebook or Twitter or these other things that I'm not involved with, given my age, but that's an influencer. And conferences obviously was not an option here for people to choose. But I found this was very interesting that people that are actually living with type 1 or type 2 are using the web as a primary source of information, whereas their providers I don't want to say they look down on it, but it's not, I think part of it is when they get home and they're not part of the practice, that they don't want to like re-engage with the diabetes world. And, it's really more about professional conferences, for them. So somewhat of a disconnect there. And I think what that means is that depending on the level of content that's being provided online for people, what your prescriber is seeing is maybe a little bit different than what people are seeing on these websites that are more consumer oriented. And now, when you look at what Libre has done with TV and Dexcom following, they had a Super Bowl ad, et cetera. This is becoming more of a like the drug sales, where they have very sophisticated TV ads that are talking about their product and about its differentiation and everything like that, where you haven't seen that in the past. When I got involved with Tandem in 2007, nobody was doing direct to consumer advertising. And now that is a key thing. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we kind of go through this. And then, so let's go directly into to CGM. So we've asked this question over the past 6 years, and it's been pretty consistent. What percentage of your patients do you think are going to be on CGM in the next 2 years? And then we have them break out the different groups of people here. And, for the most part, they think that the majority of pumpers should be on CGM, not surprisingly. And then for type 1 MDI, you're looking at 3/4 of them. And then as you kind of get into the type 2 space, it gets closer to 50%, which is still a significant amount of people given the size of that segment. And then as people who aren't on insulin, it kind of drops into the 30% level. And these are people that are testing once, maybe twice a day. And so the argument about whether they should be on a continuous sensor kind of drops off a bit if they're not on insulin. But so that's kind of, they're very bullish about, the technology here. But then when you ask the PWDs about whether their clinicians are bringing up CGM, this is really shocking. I mean, never. For people that are type 1, type 2 on intensive insulin therapy, almost 40% of the time that their clinician is not bringing up CGM. And this is from, 2000, this is a 2-year-old study, but this is a big group, 400 some odd patients. This is the last study that we just did in 2021. It was very similar to that level. And, part of this, I think, is there are clinicians that feel like, people even, with type 1 aren't technically adept enough to wear a sensor to figure out what to do with the information, and to view the graphs and view the data and everything like that, and they get what they need out of traditional finger sticks, and especially on the type 2 side, where those people are just not testing enough during the day, and they feel like because of cost and issues like that they don't need to be on a CGM. But I thought that was kind of shocking. And obviously this changes when somebody's on a pump. They're talking about over 50% of the time, 60% of the time that they should be on a CGM. But you look over here on the type 2 side, for the most part, they're not talking about CGM at all in this group. And so even though CGM has so many opportunities, for people to replace finger sticks and to give them better data and to take better actions, on their glucose levels, in a 17 million people or so who are type 2, it's not even being brought up at all from their physicians. And then we asked this is called a net promoter score. So, it's how likely would you be to recommend X product to a friend or colleague? And we want to, compare the major ones, Dexcom, Abbott, and Medtronic, to each other. And Dexcom scores really well. It's always scored well, for the people that we look at. This is from 2021. These are prescribers and educators that we talked to. So Dexcom's done a really good job of promoting their brand, with the prescriber community. And Abbott's pretty close, at 55. Medtronic really, with their sensor, has dropped off. When I started at Tandem in 2007, this score was probably close to Dexcom. for their overall pump and CGM. They were the only ones out there, kind of with it. They were the leader then. The HCP community really trusted them. And as you had new technology kind of come out and people have had frustrations with the Medtronic sensor, you can see how quickly that's dropped off. And so that's a significant issue. And just comparing that to all other medical devices, you kind of want to be above 30, and so these are really good scores out there. And then when we compare that, with the PWDs, it's definitely consistent with Dexcom. Dexcom has an 81, which is an extremely high score. Abbott drops off at 27. So the HCPs at 55, they're pretty happy with the product, but the people who are actually using it dropped off a little bit. And I think that's because if they're type 1, some of the original Libre readings weren't as accurate in the low ends and things like that, and that's definitely been changed with the Libre 2. But you can see that the Medtronic group is higher. It's not negative, and I think part of this is once you're on one of these devices, there's a loyalty to it. And I know a lot of the people who are on a Medtronic pump and a Medtronic CGM are loyal to the product, even though it may have accuracy issues. And so you still have a positive score versus the HCPs, who I think are more on the front lines of dealing with accuracy issues and having to report things and things like that. They're giving it definitely a negative score there. So that was interesting. And then we talk about cost. And this has been a big debate especially between Abbott and Dexcom about, who has the cheaper CGM that's out there. And so we asked HCPs about, for their people, who are they're caring for, what their monthly out-of-pocket cost is. And they view Abbott as definitely the cheaper product, by about $10, per month here, versus Dexcom. And this is their out-of-pocket cost after insurance, things like that. And then we asked PWDs about that. They rate them pretty much the same. And so if you look at the 2021 average, $46 versus Abbott at $46, you'll see that that's exactly the same. And then in fact, Dexcom actually has almost 40% of their people paying nothing, so there's a disconnect there. And I think that's been something that Abbott's been successful with in terms of the perception and how they kind of position the product as being something that's more affordable. But when you actually ask people about what they're actually paying out of pocket, it's very equivalent between the two sensors there. And then something that we do every year is we try to position new products out there that we want people to give us a rating about, and kind of whether they'll buy it or whatever, prescribe it. And so this year we did the G7, which I know you all know about. We have the Senseonics Eversense XL, which is a 6-month sensor. We have the new Medtronic sensor, and then the Abbott Freestyle Libre 3, which is smaller, et cetera, than what they have out there right now. And so they had to read the description and then give us feedback on that. And so from the HCP standpoint, when we look at the type 1 space, which is right here, the vast majority of people told us that the G7 was kind of their favorite. And so a lot of this is the brand equity that G6 has built up, G5, G4, the previous versions of Dexcom, and they feel like that is the best sensor for type 1. But when you flip over to the type 2 side, look at this all of a sudden Abbott is at over 50% in terms of favorability. And then for people that are not on insulin, people that are on GLP-1s, SGLT2s, or just on oral medications, that's by far the favorite product. And the feedback that we get there is that they think that Abbott's easier to train, easier to onboard, generally easier to act on information. And they feel like, that versus Dexcom, Dexcom may be like a little bit too much information, too many alerts or alarms, that type of thing for that type 2 space. So I think this has been consistent, in the last 5 years that we have actually, done this kind of thing. And that's with the prescribers. Now, when we go to PWDs, they're pretty much in line with that view. So people that are on MDI type 1, they feel, or type 2, they feel like Dexcom's the best one. People that are currently using Dexcom are not going to switch. That 90% preference score there, which is awesome. People who are on Medtronic, sensors, even though we hear a lot about the accuracy issues and everything with the Medtronic sensor, if they're a current Medtronic customer, they're still voting for the next generation of Medtronic, which again goes to this kind of like customer loyalty thing. And then we have the brittle group, who are having issues with highs and lows and everything. They feel like Dexcom's the best. And then if you go over to the people who are not currently using CGM, they feel like Libre is the best solution for them. And then we cut it by these other groups over here, so you can see the difference. But overall, Libre, if you look at the overall universe of diabetes in terms of total population, it's getting the top scores in terms of, and I think that the reason it's doing that is because of human factors. It's in terms of ease of use, the way that the product is being positioned. But if you're somebody that is type 1 and you really want the tight control, automated systems, all that kind of thing, then they're voting for Dexcom. And as you know, there are no automated systems that are currently linked up with Abbott, and that will change over the next couple of years. But right now, that's Dexcom and Medtronic are your only options there. And then when we look about why aren't people on a CGM? So there's still a big part of the market of people that are still using finger sticks. And and there's a bunch of companies that are trying to come to market with a new CGM, with a new sensor. And so we said, what's really important? Is it duration? Is it the 14-day versus 7-day, 10-day kind of thing? Is it customer service? All these kind of things that we kind of put up here. It's really the cost to the patient. And that's really, when you think about the out-of-pocket costs of the average is around $50. That means that some people are paying over $100. Some people they're paying zero. But when somebody is, let's say they're new to diabetes, they've just been diagnosed with type 2, for instance, they're having to pay for a GLP-1 or for insulin and the costs that go with that. And then you're saying, oh, by the way, you have to pay $50 or $60 a month. They're looking at that compared to finger sticks, which are close to zero in out-of-pocket costs, and saying that that's not something that I'm up for. And so the HCPs see that. They're on the front lines of this, and they say that that's the number one issue. And then when you talk about what people with living with diabetes say, over here, the major reasons that they have not switched to a CGM is they assume that it's too expensive. They just don't know. They haven't gone through the insurance verification process, those kind of things, to figure out what their monthly out-of-pocket costs are. They look at that device, it looks pretty snazzy, and they just assume that it's too expensive there. So the people are, I think the HCPs and PWDs are fairly in line on that issue. And then this is interesting. I thought we talk about adherence. And so a continuous glucose monitor, you think, you want to wear that all the time and get the benefits out of it. But sometimes, people either they will take the sensor off, or they still have the sensor on, but they're not paying attention, to the data, and they're not looking at it. And so we asked the HCPs about adherence levels between type 1 and type 2. And they're pretty much saying, with the folks that have type 1, we're at about 75 to 80% adherence, given a given week in terms of people actually using the sensor. And then that drops off quite a bit if they have type 2. And they feel like Abbott actually gives a higher compliance level than Dexcom. And then Medtronic drops off, I think, because people get frustrated with the accuracy levels when they're trying to calibrate, and they look at, the CGM value versus what their finger sticks actually are showing them. They're saying, well, this doesn't really, give me any kind of benefit. And so they stop actually wearing the sensor. And then when you ask the PWDs about adherence, they feel like it's 100%. They're like, yeah, if I'm on this, I'm wearing it every day, all the time. And so I think there's a bit of a disconnect where the HCPs are saying, I don't really trust the fact that, the people that I'm caring for are actually using their sensor 24/7. Whereas when you talk to those folks, it's almost 100% here. But the Medtronic, people do definitely drop off compared to Abbott and to Dexcom. So that was the CGM side of things. And then we'll wrap up with pumps, and then we'll take questions here. So pumps is an area that I'm most familiar with, having been at Tandem since 2007. We talk a lot about this aspect of, when you look at the type 1 space, despite all the advances in automated insulin delivery and pump features and functionality and things like that, you've gone from maybe 25% when I first started in 2007 up to about 32% of type 1s that are on a pump, and which is not a lot. And given the advances in technology, you would assume that there would be a lot more people on a pump. And there's various reasons for that. There's reimbursement issues. There's people not wanting to be hooked up to a device. People, feel like they are fine with a pen or a syringe. There's just a whole bunch of different consumer personas that you can kind of put together that will answer that question. But from the HCP perspective, they're pretty bullish. When you look at people who are prescribers, what we call medium pump practices, where they just do a moderate amount versus low amounts of pumps, small practices, educators versus prescribers. Everybody is saying, in the next 5 years, our type 1s, over 75% of them are going to be on a pump, which is a lot higher, obviously, than what we have now. And then when we talk about what we do with the PWD survey, what's happening is that their prescribers are not bringing up these systems, and that's the reason why your pump percentage is not higher than you think it would be. Look at this. No discussion. This is from this year or last year. How much of a discussion have you or physician had about insulin pumps? Almost 40% say no. Probably about 60 to 70% slight to no, which is a huge number. And we compare that with 2020, and it's actually worse versus that group. And I think the reason for this is that a lot of the physicians, if they haven't already put somebody on a pump, there's this group of people, the majority of their practice, where they think that the technology is too advanced. There's too much training required. It may be a reimbursement issue, these kind of things, but this does not jive, with what they're telling us in the previous slide, where 75% of their type 1s are going to be on a pump. And then where they start to talk about it more is for people that are overwhelmed with their blood sugars going high and low. And that's really the tipping point where their HCP says, okay, you should probably be on an automated system here. And then we break this out by type 1 and type 2, but it's still the same story, that there's just not a lot of discussion here. This goes to something that I think is important is, we all assume that we live in a place like San Diego, where I'm from, where I have Scripps, Sharp, Kaiser, UCSD, all these great institutions where you have really good endocrinologists who are kind of on top of technology. But not everybody, lives in an area like that, and they're dealing with a primary care physician who's a really good physician, but they're having to cover the entire spectrum of healthcare, and they're not entirely, on top of on technology within diabetes, or their endocrinologist, if they have access to them, they're only seeing them maybe twice a year, once a year, instead of 4 times a year, and so they're just not having that kind of discussion. And so this, I think, is an important thing for everybody to kind of consider. And really what it's led to, whether it's a pump or whether it's CGM, is the manufacturers of these devices are starting to go direct to the consumer. They're doing TV ads. You've got Nick Jonas, in the Super Bowl, doing ads about CGM. Insulet recently has done direct-to-consumer advertising about their pump. And I think it's just like with pharma. if they feel like the prescriber community is not bringing up their product, they're going to go direct, whether it's social media or television ads, to make sure that people who are living with the disease understand the technology and then bring that up, with their clinician when they see them. And so that, you may say, well, how does that, compare to the last few years? This is from 2020, no discussion, 25%. 2019, no discussion, 24%. 2018, no discussion, 21%. And as we've done this over the last 5 years, it hasn't changed that much. And that, to me, that means that the prescribers, the educators feel like there's a certain segment, a pretty big segment of their patient population that just can't handle the technology, and they're not going to bring it up. And so that's a huge issue for the industry going forward. When we talk about pain points, and we talked about this a little bit, before, and again, this is on the pump side, the HCPs feel like tubing is the biggest pain point. And so this really resonates, with the insulin community, who are promoting the Omnipod 5 now, their new patch pump. But tubing, getting caught on things, is the number one pain point that educators and prescribers are saying, for why people feel like is an issue with managing their diabetes. When you look at people who are on MDI right now, they agree that tubing is the major issue. Before, in the previous study we did, was cost was the issue, but tubing, getting caught in something or not having something attached to them, was the biggest issue that they're facing. And then when we talk about this net promoter score that we looked at for CGM, this is on the pump side again. HCPs right now are rating Tandem a lot higher than the other two options out there. I can tell you that when I started at Tandem, this was exactly the opposite. Medtronic was probably in the 70s. They were entrenched in the HCP offices. They had people that were there that would take care of the prescription, take care of the reorders, and they were handling a lot of this back office stuff. And they, people love them for that. And Tandem has done a really good job, I'd say, over the last 5 years of changing that dynamic and creating a product that was linked with Dexcom, that had great outcomes. And you can see that kind of in their scores here. And when you look at how you compare HCP scores to PWDs, a little bit different. So we tracked this over the last 4 years or so. You can see in 2018, we looked at customer service, company loyalty, all these different things, wait time on the phone. Tandem swept the awards, except for the favorite projected pump here. And then as things have gone along, you can see that Omnipod has done a really good job of kind of changing some of these perspectives. And now in our latest one, they have the highest company loyalty. Omnipod 5 scored as the highest, favorite pump. Customer service issues are, kind of favoring Omnipod, but Tandem still has a really high net promoter score at 89, with Omnipod very high at 69 and Medtronic at 6. So this is going to be kind of interesting, as you have a new product in Omnipod 5 being launched right now, and Control-IQ, which is Tandem's product, with phone control for their boluses. Those are pretty big advancements, I'd say, in the pump industry. And so we'll kind of see how this plays out the next time we do this survey with people that are buying, actually buying the product. And finally, we do this market basket exercise where they can pick between. Tandem has a product called T-Sport, which is pretty much a stripped down version of Control-IQ, which is a smaller pump, and it's controlled by the phone. We have Beta Bionics over here, and then the Omnipod 5, which is just approved, and the original Control-IQ, and then Medtronic 780G. So we test all 5 of these. And when you look at HCP's preference, it's still very strong for Control-IQ. They feel very comfortable with this product. They've had good outcomes with it. But you're starting to see that comparing this to 2020 versus 21, there's a big increase for people that like the Omnipod Horizon, which is now called Omnipod 5. The reason for that is now, before, the reason they didn't prescribe Omnipod was it wasn't connected with a Dexcom. It didn't have automated, delivery. But now with Omnipod 5, they've answered those questions, and it's more, kind of in line with what they want. And so you're starting to see that increase there in preference. When you look at PWDs, this is what I find really interesting is people tend to stick with their brand. And so the current Tandem people, they're not switching away. If they do switch away, they're going to switch to the T Sport, which is that smaller version of the Tandem pump. For MDI users, they really prefer the Omnipod 5. For current Medtronic users, they like the 780G, what Medtronic's kind of promising them with their upgrade program, the automation, the new sensor, all these things that kind of come with that new product. They're kind of buying into it. And then the Omnipod people definitely are not switching away. Once you go on a patch pump, a lot of those people are like, there's no way I'm going to tubing. And then when I take all this kind of information and I weight it based on the number of people that are on a pump in the US, from a market share perspective, what you get is that Omnipod 5 is by far the top product that PWDs prefer. And so this, I think, really bodes well for Insulet as they're in a launch mode for that product. And what Tandem is looking at right now is that they're the favorite, with the prescriber community. And so Insulet's got a challenge there to kind of break that, that barrier with the HCPs to say, hey, we have outcomes, we have a pivotal, trial, we have good data too, but it's going to take a while. Tandem's done a really good job of saying real world outcomes. People are in range 80% of the time, 77% of the time with Control-IQ, and people have had a really good experience with that product. And so even though Omnipod is scoring really highly in our surveys, they still have that barrier to kind of overcome perception-wise with the prescriber community. And so in summary, I'd say that, we talked about this. The first thing is that there's a disconnect between where you live and the type of type of clinician that you're dealing with in terms of their level of education and knowledge about technology, and kind of the way that they view your world. Does this person, can they afford the technology? Can they handle it? These type of things. And a lot of times they're kind of paternalistic and they say, I'm just not going to prescribe this. They're fine on finger sticks. They're fine on syringes and MDI, and I'm not going to bring up an AID system. And so that brings up number two, which is there definitely is a need to go direct to consumer. And I think the manufacturers have kind of figured this out to describe the benefits of their product, and to have the people living with diabetes bring it up with their clinician. Number three is that Tandem has really built this stellar reputation with the prescriber community, and people that are trying to launch a new pump or a new AID system are going to have to deal with that. On number four here, I think there's probably a lot more alignment between HCPs and PWDs on the CGMs in terms of the benefit that you can get from it and replacing finger sticks, the accuracy, that type of thing. And they view Dexcom as your preferred product for type 1, Abbott for type 2. And then from influencers, there's a huge disconnect here. These clinicians are not going online. They feel like when they get home, they'd rather, watch Duke lose to UNC, which unfortunately is, I had to watch that last night, or, just do something different than learning about diabetes. Whereas people, living with diabetes, they're actually actively engaged with social media and things like that. And then finally, the pain points, this area here about complications while you're sleeping, I think is a big issue. It's talked about quite a bit, when you're going to conferences and medical conferences and stuff like that, but it's not number one. It's kind of like an afterthought. But when you're talking to people living with diabetes, whether they're a parent or somebody that has diabetes, it's number one. It's the big issue that they think about. And so for manufacturers or other technologies that can address that issue, I think that's a big one. And so that's my formal presentation, but certainly happy to answer questions now.
That is absolutely great and wonderful, and thank you. There are a lot of questions, and I have a lot of questions, so we'll take it from the top. And first of all, thank you. That's a lot of information, and so let me just take it all the way to the top. And Tina and Rebecca, if you just also want to jump in on some of these questions. Okay, so Rebecca asks, how much of this disconnect between HCPs and patients are for the patients very involved in their diabetes? The doctors work with a lot of patients who are not interested in all the technology. Do they talk about, my patients don't want this? Or do they just say they just don't talk about it?
Yeah, I don't think it's that they don't want it. I think that that when you go into your average meeting or appointment with the clinician, they're focused on, do they have a lot of excursions? Are they having a hard time, managing their blood sugars? And they're kind of going through all that kind of stuff. And then they're answering other questions. And then they may have 5 minutes at the end. And if they feel like, things are going well enough, they just don't have time to kind of bring up the technology, or they just, in the back of their mind, they're feeling like, this person, probably isn't on the top of my list for somebody that I want to engage with about technology that involves, more training, a prescription, out-of-pocket costs, all these kind of things. And I've always viewed this market as there's a group of people that are about 30% that kind of like jump out at the clinician and say, oh, this person, definitely is adept at technology. They would benefit from automation and things like that. But that other 70%, I feel like they just don't have time to bring it up during the actual appointment.
Yeah, we've heard some of the researchers talk about the type 1 community, because that's what I'm familiar with. And there are those of us that are in this tiny pie slice of very active, involved patients. And then there is about a 50% blob of people who'll do what they have to do. And then there's a fairly sizable group that's been called black market. Or dark matter, and they don't tell me about it. I don't want to hear alarms. They just shut off alarms. They don't want to know, and perhaps that feeds into doctors not being assertive. I don't think it's a good excuse, but do you ever follow up these studies with the HCPs to show them where the disconnect is?
We have not. That's a good suggestion, though. But we have not historically. Yeah.
Because I would love to go along on those calls and say, why don't you listen to your patients? But that's
right.
what I would do.
Right.
And I think it comes back to, they don't have time. They're not reimbursed for the time.
Yep.
They don't want patients that take a lot of work. Marion asked a question. She doesn't see site absorption issues on the list from HCPs, so they didn't even mention that as a concern.
Yeah, and part of this in market research is that we're prompting them with a certain list of things, and so some of that stuff may have fallen off the list. It's definitely something when we do focus groups, more of the qualitative kind of stuff, that site absorption definitely comes up. And what I remember, the original focus groups that we did for Tandem, back in the day, not only did that come up, but it was the rate of how insulin was being delivered with various pumps was a huge issue in terms of pain and kind of like the what people were feeling when they're getting a bolus delivered, for instance, and that varied widely by the type of pump that they were on.
Hey, before I forget, I just want to say congratulations on Tandem. You were part of that launch. And yes,
yeah.
we've watched them become the mainstream, and it is pretty remarkable. And part of me thinks it's because they have a touch screen, but I hope it's not the reason. Among the HCPs that you've dealt with, are the medical doctors, the least receptive to patient input?
Yes. The educators by far are the most receptive. And when we do market research, we weight it almost like 70-30 in favor of the educators, because I feel like they just know a lot more about the technology. They're more in tune with, what their patients want. I'd say almost 30% of them actually have type 1 themselves. And that's the reason they kind of got into that industry. And so we feel like their input is very valuable. And then if they're a nurse practitioner or PA, they can actually prescribe, products in many states. That being said, we definitely still need to look at the endos. And one of the big things that we've done this year is build up a big primary care database of prescribers, because a lot of our clients, are looking at, especially on the CGM side, is understanding, that mindset of the primary care physician who's managing, everything from hypertension to diabetes and all these other chronic diseases, and they have all this stuff kind of thrown at them. So how are they supposed to, stay on top of technology? And that's the big area of expansion, especially in the CGM side, for type 2s, is to better educate that primary care community and make sure that they understand that it's reimbursed and all these kind of things. So,
well, this is also frustrating that this data is so starkly different between the HCPs and the patients. Do you have any thoughts on how we could comb your data and your reports and bring it to the medical community, or with your help, or who would be the voice that would actually do that?
Well, when we look at, the influencers for HCPs, they obviously look at medical conferences. And so this kind of stuff is a perfect, poster or whatever, for ADA, for people to look at. On the international side, we do a lot of work in Europe and in Canada, Australia. And part of the way that we got people to participate in this market research was by giving them an executive summary of what their peers, had told us. And so I think that was very, very helpful. We haven't done that in the US, and it's something that I think Seagrove is going to look at in the future.
Do you provide them an incentive to actually read it and like pass a test and get like a gift card?
Yeah, and it's expensive. It used to be, for a doctor to take a survey, it was like $100, and now it's $200. So there's inflation for sure. And for a 20-minute survey, to get somebody to take it for under $200 is hard if they're a doctor. And in Europe, it's even worse. We're paying, $250 in euros, which is even more expensive. So yeah, they're getting incentivized. And then, at least in Europe, we're giving them the executive summary of the data.
This is significant data that they need to take care of their patients better, and you have to pay them for this.
That's correct. Yeah.
And who knows about that other than you?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's just because I've heard, and it's kind of been validated, though I don't have good sources, that pump companies give spiffs or extra money to endos who prescribe their pumps, and Medtronic has been known as their money is the biggest to get prescriptions. I don't know if it's still that way, and I don't know how they get away with that, but did you see any of that when Tandem was trying to get into the market?
Historically, the way that kind of works is that doctors can be involved with clinical trials where they're paid for that. They can, based on feedback and market research, get reimbursed for that. Even with patients, they're like, if you fill out the survey, we'll give you, X amount off your next pump purchase. And you can do these various things to make that, let's say it's a $700 out-of-pocket cost for your pump. If you complete these 5 different steps, we'll make that out-of-pocket cost like nothing, and so companies that have deep pockets can do that. And I think over time, that's probably been negated somewhat. And things, when I first started at Tandem, there were no outcome studies at all with pumps. It was kind of like you just had to prove that you pumped a certain amount of insulin and that was it. Now they have outcome studies in major medical journals saying that time in range is this, your A1C reduction is this, and that's kind of the standard. And I think now that you kind of have that, all this kind of ancillary stuff in the background that was going on kind of goes away. And so the payers look at that outcome studies, those outcome studies, the prescribers and the PWDs do as well. So I think that's a good thing, you know, that people have kind of migrated toward actual medical outcomes.
Got it. There was a paper that was released last year from Yale University that recommended that type 2s not use CGM because they don't know what to do with the data and they don't care. I think that caused quite a bit of stir because I think CGM is such a remarkable tool. But even at Yale,
yeah,
you would think they if anybody would at least not want that result out because it doesn't help any patient.
Right.
Anyway, let me see if I can get down to, and again, Tina or Rebecca, if you're out there, you can jump in. Here's a question, harking back to cannula and absorption issues that are actually more important than external tubing. When you do your next survey, can you incorporate that? Because that's a significant problem. Is it being pumped in and is it getting absorbed? Less than it gets caught on a doorknob.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to do that. I think one of the reasons we probably haven't done that is a lot of these questions that we throw into market research come from our clients, and they're all using the same, same set, same tubing. So everything's kind of equal and nobody's really focused on, how to improve that end of the insulin delivery. So we definitely need to do that. Yeah.
This came off of Facebook a little bit earlier. How do we incorporate technology and medical device training into not only diabetes educators, but to endocrinologists as well? She said, I asked my new endo, I went to a new endo and he asked me how to fill out the RX for my Omnipod. I had no idea how to even order it. So, are you looking at how to incorporate some of this training for the professionals? Are they asking you? Or are you finding solutions to the fact that
one of the benefits of the COVID-19 pandemic was a lot of the companies, especially CGM companies, have gone to almost a 100% online training modules and online prescription ordering, where you can, if you want a Libre, you go online, you can, fill out the information, they validate your insurance, and they say, here's a pharmacy where you can go pick it up. And I think something like 70% of Omnipods are now going through the pharmacy as well. So you're seeing this kind of trend of taking things out of what, the durable medical equipment part of the industry, which tends to be heavily, distributor based and all these kind of, hoops and pre-authorizations, things like that, and putting it into the pharmacy channel. And along with that goes this online, onboarding and training. Again, Omnipod Insulet's been very ahead of the game, on these kind of things. And then, COVID-19 has forced every company to kind of do that, where they knew that people couldn't go into the office and that things had to be done online. And so that's one of the silver linings of the pandemic.
If there is one, yeah, that's great.
Yes.
So another question. Sorry, jumping in. This is a Joanne question, but does the data that you have indicate that we may need another layer of healthcare professionals who can actually handle and teach the technology, and on top of what we already have?
Yeah, I don't know that it's another layer. I think one of the issues that I'm seeing is that a lot of endocrinology practices do not have a CDE. They don't have an educator, and if they do, it's Medtronic's person that's paid for. And so there's, I think, a definite need to bring the CDE element, either whether it's online or however, to additional geographies. I also cover oncology. So, in addition to diabetes, Seagrove does oncology, and they have this group of nurses who their entire, business is to make sure that patients understand, the drugs that they're on for cancer and how it's paid for. And they're not necessarily, clinicians. That, I mean, it's more of this kind of tactical element of cancer therapy. And I think to some extent there's a need for that in diabetes, but I think the bigger need is we come across, practices all the time that are desperate for CDEs, and they don't have the money, or they don't have the access to educators. And so that's where the gap is.
Okay, I'm going to jump to something you said. I'm not quite sure. And if you want to take your screen share off, that we get to see you full face.
Yeah.
You mentioned that things will change with Abbott. How? From my experience and what I do in our community, I find them to be completely non-receptive to the patient community. They won't even talk. They're just not interested. And it may be that we do things they don't like, but we're still patients. How do you said in the next couple of years, you think things might be changing? Please tell me some good news.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I love about Abbott is they kind of surprise people out of the blue with, all of a sudden they went from a 10-day sensor to a 14-day sensor. Then they got Medicare coverage. And then, all of a sudden they have all these, type 2s that are using CGM technology. And I think for the type 1 community, which I know is your focus, the improvements in accuracy for Libre 2 have been pretty good. And then with Libre 3 coming out, which is right now, I think in Germany and France, and then, they're looking for FDA approval. I think that's going to, be accurate enough to either drive an AID system, which, Tandem and Insulet have partnered with them on. If not, it should be, pretty close to where Dexcom is. And it's just really interesting. Their whole philosophy is all about broadening the amount of people that are on CGM. And when you look at their advertisements, things like that, it's about the average person, let's say with type 2, and then talking about, reduction in finger sticks, things, basic stuff. Whereas Dexcom's more about, this is the most advanced system. It drives AID systems. This is let's call it a Tesla or whatever of CGM systems. And I think at some point, those things start to converge. Dexcom wants to get into where Abbott is in the type 2 space. Abbott wants to become more of an accurate, perception kind of sensor. And I think both of those things kind of converge in the next couple of years as their technology changes.
Okay, so then I'll pitch the next big word, which is interoperability. Where do you see that? We don't see them all playing very nicely with each other.
Yeah, I think when I first started Seagrove, which was in 2017, January, having been at Tandem, going through regulatory submissions, things like that, I'm like, this interoperability stuff is, how are you going to get that done? It's not only is there a regulatory part of it getting through the FDA, but you have these business partners who have all these other projects they're working on, and you still have to have, their codes and all this kind of stuff. And I just knew from my own experience that it's a lot easier said than done to say that we have an iCGM and it's going to work with everybody, or an ACE pump and those kind of things. And so right now, we haven't seen where you've seen the benefit of it is when a new CGM comes out, like a G7. There's no submission required for a pump company to go, and change from a G6 to a G7. It's like, it just happens. And they just have to do the technical validation and have these things kind of on file. But when you're talking about the true vision of somebody being able to pick their pump, pick their algorithm, pick their sensor, which is where we want to be, that still hasn't happened. And I think that's because, these business partnerships have to occur. And right now you're having, people kind of choosing their preferred partner versus, this overall vision where we want to be.
Okay, so your studies, are they mostly US based?
They were until last year, and then we did a major push into Europe and Canada. And so we definitely have a lot of data now on that, on those.
Is it
those fronts.
significantly different?
Yes, that's a great question. So Canada is very similar to the US, but when you go to Europe, there's so much more into outcome studies. Like if you want to get the government to, or the payer in certain situations to pay for an AID system, they're still not even paying for a Medtronic 670G. They just feel like, there's not enough, evidence out there to justify the cost. And so now that you've got these robust pivotal trials behind Tandem and behind Insulet, they're starting to change that. But as you get in things in Europe are reimbursed not at the country level, they're reimbursed at the local level. And so let's pick Italy, which is a country I'm pretty familiar with in our research. Once you get out of Rome, all these different little municipalities and stuff like that, they don't have any reimbursement for CGM or for pumps. It's all out of pocket. And so what you find is that companies like Medtronic understand that. And if you go to the Medtronic website for certain countries in Europe, it's all focused on out-of-pocket payment. It has nothing to do with, payer reimbursement, the country reimbursement. It's like, how do we make this most affordable for you if you're paying out of pocket? And that's the reality, I'd say, in the majority of little towns, across Europe.
And we're seeing that with our friends in Australia and Thailand. They also, we're shipping things to them because they just can't, they have no coverage. You mentioned direct to consumer, and we all were very aware that the Jonas, the Nick Jonas ad really created a stir in our community, and there's Dexcom trying to make more money and pushing, and it wasn't well loved. But as I think about what you're saying, I wonder whether direct to consumer would be interesting for some of the European entries to let people here know, so that we can start talking it up and say we want this, because the blockage here is the FDA. And would love to see some more options to come here. I don't know if that would work well, but
yeah.
Our friend.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Erik.
I was just going to say about Europe. What I find interesting in the past few years that I've been going there for conferences and stuff like that is they are a lot more technically advanced in certain areas than the US. They were the first ones to, like, the cell phone coverage, for instance, is so much better over there, and the amount of, people that are using navigation systems on their car was way ahead of where we were in things like that. And I think that there's when things aren't paid for by the payers and the government, there's a natural inclination to say, well, this is just a different market, and it's hard. But the answer to that is to go direct to consumer, for sure. And there's so many intricacies, when you go country by country in Europe, to figure out what's that hot button that's gonna, kind of catch people. And it's not, I don't think it's, here where you're doing a Super Bowl ad. It's going to be, something completely different, but it's up to the local marketing person who understands that market, in that country.
Okay, go ahead, Tina.
Our friend Julie, who is in the dental field, said that they're required to give each patient every option available with a price breakdown and treatment plans. And I can attest to that myself. Why is that not required in the medical offices?
Yeah, and I think part of that is when you look at your dental coverage, it's bad. Insurance, covers like not anywhere near what it covers for the medical benefits. And so everything in the dental field's been like focused on the consumer, about their out-of-pocket cost, and about stack ranking all these benefits versus each other. I have that same experience with my dentist, and until in the medical field, as long as things are still 80-20 insurance versus, out-of-pocket payment, that dynamic, is not going to exist. And one of the big things that we always hear from the clinician side of the universe is they don't know, which pump's covered. Just want like a printout, a one-page printout of, depending on the person's insurance coverage, this is what their out-of-pocket is going to be. And the problem with that is it changes, quarter by quarter, month by month. And so the manufacturers can't really keep up with it, but that's definitely an area that we hear from the clinical community that they want.
The patients want that as well.
Yeah.
So if the problem is the endos are tired at the end of the day and they want to watch football or basketball or whatever they're watching, and sure, why not? And someone made the comment, but us loopers get home and get on Facebook to figure out how to run our loops. We're living it. We're the ones most impacted by it. Would it be useful to take your data and approach medical schools and nursing schools and CDE training to say, this is what's needed in the marketplace, and the endos are not doing it, so maybe the new endos can? And I don't know if your approach to use your data for education purposes or how that would work.
Yeah, I definitely think that residency programs and those kind of areas, fellowships, for the educators is a great way to expose people to this type of data and get them more, definitely get them more engaged, for sure. Yeah.
So you'll definitely be hearing from me then on this.
Okay.
A question: would you be interested and willing to do any research in the DIY community on perceptions? We've done a lot of data. There's been a lot of data gathering and studies on effectiveness for the DIY loop, but more perceptions and interactions with the community. I can guarantee you people for your study. I assume everyone's saying yes, but would that be something of interest? I know we're a small market, but we are a leading edge market.
Yeah. When you think about, there's AID systems, there's 3 of them right now. And then in the next year or so, there's different iterations of these systems from Medtronic and Insulet and Tandem. And then you've got Bigfoot, you've got, Beta Bionics, all these other companies out there. And at some point, they're all going to look the same, and you need differentiation, and that differentiation is going to come from the type of input that you're talking about. So yeah, we definitely would be interested in that.
I guarantee we talk a lot, and we'd be probably really thrilled to give you feedback and even shape what the questions are you ask into the medical community, because I don't think they even know what to ask.
Yeah.
So I offer up my community. I haven't even asked them yet, but I think we'd all be just thrilled to participate in research that really says, what do we need?
Yeah.
Listen,
yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to thank you. It's getting late. It's Sunday night. I have to ask you, do you play guitar, banjo, and piano?
My daughter plays piano. I'm terrible at it, but I do play guitar and banjo. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. It looks like a good setup there.
Yeah.
I want to
just like the kangaroo.
I'm sorry, Rebecca, what?
Said I just like the kangaroo.
Yeah.
So that is a Animus kangaroo. It's one of their original Animus ones. When they at the various conferences, they would give that out. So,
Yeah.
Very good.
Well, thank you. I absolutely such an unusual look at what we're dealing with on a moment by moment basis. One more question: do you ever deal with the insurers? As I think that is probably one of our biggest points of hell, and it takes so much time, and it's so frustrating and shouldn't be. Do you do anything with that?
Yeah, that's the third leg of our research. We do PWDs. We have a pretty decent database of type 1 and type 2s. We have pretty much every endo and CDE in the country, and then in Europe as well. And then thirdly, we have 1,000 payers, and about 100 of those 1,000 people that we have are what I consider to be the ones who are like on the front lines making decisions about technology and drugs and things like that within diabetes, and they know their stuff. And so we do a big study every year with that group of 100, and that's major insurers all the way down to like Sharp Healthcare and kind of the local hospital-based insurers, and then these regional kind of players, and we get really good feedback from them. And I would tell you that they are they're surprisingly very engaged in this space, not only because it's a chronic disease, and they're mostly focused on type 2 because that's where they're spending most of their money. Their biggest challenge is that people switch insurers every 2 years, and so they're like, well, if I invest in this person over here and spend a lot on technology and whatever, they're just going to go over to Aetna in the next 2 years because they switch jobs. And so there's always that dynamic that kind of happens. But I would say that the group that we have are very knowledgeable and very engaged in the space.
I would just love to sit and talk with them. If you ever do focus groups, it seems very often that they are heartless. It's kind of their decisions are a little capricious, and it's hard, and it takes hours to unravel. And it bothers our healthcare providers, who then have to do prior authorizations, and it's hours.
And the people we deal with they're the pharmacy directors, and they're kind of a different group than the average consumers dealing with. You're talking about, a medical director who is faceless and nameless, and you're getting a letter in the mail saying that they rejected your coverage. And unfortunately, those aren't the people that we're surveying. And so we're getting a bit of a skewed, view of the world. But I hear your pain there. I've dealt with that a lot. So.
No, it's terribly frustrating, and it's just beyond painful. But if you ever do an interactive group, I also will offer you people.
Right.
Yeah, I guess that's my last question for you then is how do we join your list of people with diabetes that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, I'll send you a follow-up to that. And whenever we do, so we do like our syndicated stuff, which is, Seagrove sponsors it. We pay people, and we do that a couple times a year with PWDs. And then we have custom stuff that we do for a company, that pays us to do that. So pretty much like every quarter we're doing some kind of survey. And so we'll just make sure that we send those links, to your group so that they can participate.
That is wonderful, and I will definitely share that. I just so very, very much appreciate. I know I kind of threw you a curveball, and this is a slightly different audience. Thank you for pulling this. The comments here are that the data you presented was just shocking. We're learning a lot, and trying to figure out how to make it go better in the future. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, and willing to do this whenever you need it. And I really enjoyed this.
All right. Thanks so much, Erik. Have a good evening.
You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.